We have here the people from Human Rights Watch who have written a report on what's going on in Zimbabwe. I think it's very important for the diamond industry to relate to this, and I think that our goal here today is to hear this discussion, these initial presenters, and then to think about the practical consequences. What can and should the industry do about human rights abuses in the diamond industry, and what is our responsibility to this? So I very much invite you. I'm looking forward to hearing your views, Georgette.
This is on?
I believe so.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today, and also for asking Human Rights Watch to participate in this important discussion. A few words about Human Rights Watch for those of you who don't know us. We're an independent, nonpartisan, non-governmental organization supported by contributions from individuals and foundations worldwide. We take no money from any government. And for 30 years, we've carried out fact-finding investigations into the most serious human rights abuses: genocide, war crimes, violence, and discrimination against people in all regions of the world. And what we do is travel to places where violence and war are rampant. We spend months on the ground interviewing victims, witnesses, government officials, rebels, corporations, and human rights abusers. And every year we publish about 150 reports that generate massive media coverage and attention from the highest levels of government and other key policymakers around the world. Our reports, we suggest, make it impossible for people, for governments, others to say, we didn't know, or worse, it didn't happen. And we confront abusers and those who have influence over them, and we put forward solutions and actions that can be taken right now to mitigate human suffering. And of course, we push for justice for victims, because we believe that sharp vigilance, timely protest, and real accountability can prevent the human rights tragedies of the 20th century from recurring. And as part of our work, we've investigated links between human rights abuses and the mining extractive industries in many countries, and the role and responsibility of companies and industries here. And we know that no one expects companies or industry to focus on human rights exclusively in the way that human rights organizations do, that we do. And no one expects companies to be heedless of profits or business opportunities. But companies and industry have an opportunity and a duty to speak out about human rights abuses in areas where they operate, since these abuses violate the host government's legal obligations and, most importantly, the principles of corporate social responsibility that many companies and industries are trying to adhere to. Most companies and industries do not want to be or seem to be complicit in human rights abuses. And in the case of the diamond industry, violating the standards and requirements in the Kimberley process. Even if companies care more about their own interests rather than principles, they still have plenty of reasons to make the places they do business and the products they sell more attractive to buyers and consumers. I'm going to focus on diamond mining in Zimbabwe to illustrate our concerns and offer some thoughts on moving forward. Building on years of work in Zimbabwe, we conducted research there early this year on abuses connected to diamond mining in the Marange area. We interviewed more than 100 people: local miners, police, soldiers, community leaders, victims, medical staff, lawyers, industry people there. We published a report called Diamonds in the Rough, and we have copies here for you. Here's what we found. Since 2006, Zimbabwe's police and army have used brutal force to control access to diamond fields in Marange and take over unlicensed diamond mining and trading. Police and soldiers have killed, tortured, beaten, and harassed thousands of people there. They have effectively waged war on the people of Marange. They drove out local miners, often to get access to the fields for high-level members of the former ruling party, ZANU-PF, led by Robert Mugabe. 3 policemen on horseback raided us while we worked in the diamond fields and shot their guns at us, one miner told us. I was shot in the thigh. 2 of my friends were shot and killed in that raid. In October of last year, this is just a few months ago, the military seized control, finally, of these fields in a brutal operation called Operation No Return. In that operation, the Army killed in cold blood more than 200 people and had them buried in mass graves. One local miner described this as a massacre and said, "Soldiers in helicopters started firing live ammunition and tear gas at us. We all stopped digging and began to run toward the hills to hide. There were many soldiers on foot chasing us. From my syndicate, 14 miners were shot and killed that morning." To this day, the Army continues to engage in such behavior and in the forced labor of hundreds of children, some as young as 8, and adults in this illegal diamond mining in Marange. They continue to torture, beat, and detain local villagers. The area is like a huge labor camp. Schools have closed. There's very little health care. Everyone has to work at some point in the fields. One 13-year-old girl told us, "Every day I would carry ore up and down the hill and only rest for short periods. We always started very early in the morning, before 8, and finished when it was dark after 6. All I want to do now is go back to school." There is massive smuggling and corruption in the diamond industry in Marange. The main beneficiaries of this trade are senior Army officials as well as high-ranking government personnel who use these diamond riches to solidify the repressive hold on power. The country, meanwhile, as most of you may know, is recovering from a severe man-made humanitarian crisis and a massive economic meltdown. If the diamond industry in Marange were properly managed, the revenue could, of course, assist the many deeply impoverished people in Zimbabwe. We have not done a detailed research on the global chain of purchase, and we want to do that in our next trip. But the evidence we gathered suggests that Marange diamonds are smuggled out via Mozambique, South Africa, and Zimbabwe's airport in Harare to Lebanon, the UAE, India, Pakistan, Europe, and some other places. We gave a copy of our report to the Kimberley Process people, which did its own mission in Marange to assess Zimbabwe's compliance with Kimberley Process standards. They endorsed our findings, although not all of our recommendations. But in July, the press reported that the review mission found Zimbabwe to be violating the Kimberley Process standards, and they urged Zimbabwe to take corrective action, mainly withdraw the security forces from that area by July 20th or face suspension. Zimbabwe has failed to comply with the Kimberley Process recommendations. In fact, it has reinforced its control of the diamond fields, clamped down further on people there, and also really restricted access to the area. If it does not comply, Zimbabwe faces suspension from Kimberley, which is one of our key recommendations. And we're pressing the Kimberley Process to take the critical next steps, release its full report on the situation at its next plenary or before, which will be in a few months, and suspend Zimbabwe's membership in the body until the government puts an end to military abuses in Marange. Suspension would mean the decertification of all diamonds originating in Zimbabwe, creating a powerful incentive for the military to end the exploitation and abuses of people there. We're also urging the Kimberley Process to expand its definition of conflict diamonds to include abuses committed by repressive regimes such as ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, ensure that the Kimberley Process sticks to the spirit of its founding document, which committed to avoiding support of groups that use profits from diamond mining to engage in rights abuses. Otherwise, our fear is that the whole process risks becoming irrelevant and toothless. We're also calling, of course, on the government of Zimbabwe to act, and it's our strong view that governments have a key role here, both alone and with industry. They need to actively support the Kimberley Process and strengthen it by endorsing an expansion of the definition that I've just described. Because at the end of the day, governments are the enforcers of the rules and the guarantors of legal obligations, and in many cases, of course, the perpetrators of abuses. We think Zimbabwe should remove the army from Marange and restore security responsibilities to the police and ensure these police abide by all the laws and rules. And we have other recommendations there. And also, we have urged Zimbabwe to end diamond smuggling and only ensure licensed miners are permitted to mine there and buyers are properly licensed. The diamond industry. What we have suggested is that it's our understanding that the World Diamond Manufacturers, the International Diamond Manufacturers Association, and the World Diamond Council have backed calls for Zimbabwe's suspension from the international diamond market until it complies with the Kimberley Process standards. Although Zimbabwe says that banning diamonds from Marange were unjustified because Zimbabwe was not involved in a war on armed conflict, the diamond trade organizations have rightly insisted that Zimbabwe must comply with the Kimberley Process recommendations to protect the integrity of the world diamond industry and retain consumer confidence at a time when the industry is going through such difficult times, which you've just heard about, of course. The diamond industry could go further, in our view, and support our call for a broad definition of the Kimberley Process mandate to include human rights concerns, and not just in armed conflict and not just involving rebel groups. As IDMA President Moti Gantz said, the diamond industry and trade is going through a very serious downturn, and more than ever before, diamond jeweler consumers need to be absolutely confident that the diamonds polished by us are indeed a significant means for growth, employment, and prosperity in the regions where these diamonds were sourced. And what we've suggested, we think, would help in this effort. I also wanted to quickly touch upon two questions Martin put to me yesterday and asked me to answer. What can the private sector, the diamond industry, really do to address the human rights issues related to diamond mining? The most obvious thing, in our view, is to change the Kimberley's rules so that it adequately addresses the types of problems we've identified in Zimbabwe. First, change the definition of a conflict diamond to include conflicts of all sorts, and second, to explicitly acknowledge human rights as part of that revised definition. We also think that the industry could follow standards for it to address human rights, such as the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, which is an industry standard designed to deal with these types of situations. And here's another suggestion. The diamond industry can cooperate with governments, because we think there has to be that partnership, in exposing the front companies, the buyers, the middlemen, the polishing centers where illicit stones end up, and the channels used by middlemen to get illicit diamonds to market. It can also take a public stand against the whole nexus of corrupt political involvement in these practices. Once the channels to market start to dry up, the cost of doing business for illicitly mined minerals will increase and the supply will be marginalized. Those in the industry who follow good practice can also help themselves if legally mined and certified stones, of course, dominate the market. Illicit stones leaking into the market can hardly be good for overall diamond prices or brand reputation. The second quick point, which Martin asked me to comment on, when should the industry pull the plug on a country, which then may make life more difficult for the people there and impact negatively on development through the loss of a source of revenue? People who are being abused directly in mines or indirectly, as the revenue is used to prop up an abusive regime in power, do not really lose if the industry quits a badly behaving country. The vast majority of Zimbabweans will not lose if illicit Zimbabwe diamonds are banned. The only people who will really lose are the senior ZANU-PF functionaries and army officers, and that may actually force Zimbabwe to put forward to have a better environment for development. We at Human Rights Watch rarely call for industries or companies to pull out of places, only in very narrow circumstances and on a case-by-case basis, because we know what these industries properly managed can do for people. But generally, we suggest the following. When nothing even the most progressive company or industry can do will minimize the harm, or the company is unwilling to do anything meaningful to minimize the harm, or when a government is the problem and revenues are just fueling the government or some other actor's ability to cause serious harm without any prospect of change, and the company has exhausted its efforts to try to change things, not just by being there, but by actively addressing human rights problems, and they are not improving, then it's time to consider whether the net harm outweighs the benefits of staying, and the company or industry risks becoming complicit in abuses. Thank you, and if you have any questions, please put them to Ian Smiley, who is the real expert on these issues. Thank you.